In this world, humanity has been pushed to the brink of extinction by the deadly creatures known as the 17 Beasts, and the only things that can be used to fight these monsters are the dug weapons wielded by the heroes. And on this day, one such hero is facing his final moments on the battlefield. He had managed to defeat the beast known as Ebon Candle, but all the energy he used to fight has taken its toll on his body, so as Ebon Candle explodes in a fiery blaze, Willem's body is petrified due to a curse. But the 500 years later, he is revived as the sole survivor of the human race. One day, Willem is walking through the city when he notices a girl fallen. So he runs over and catches her before she hits the ground. People gather around to see what the commotion is, but instead of helping, they begin looking at her in disgust because she doesn't have any animal features. Kathle apologizes to Willem for all the trouble she caused, but he says it's not a big deal and asks her if she's new around here. Kathle admits that this is her first time in this city, so he gives her his hood to cover up and leads her away from the discriminatory crowd and into a back alley. He takes her to a shop and buys her a hat so she can keep her non-furry face covered, but before she can thank him, he cuts her off and tells her that this town sucks. It has food worse than Britain, a higher crime rate than Gotham, and chances of getting mugged go up really fast if you don't look like them, so this isn't a good place for a tourist like her. He offers to take her to the port so she can leave the town, and Kathle appreciates him looking out for her. But there's still one place she wants to visit before she leaves, so she asks him if he would be kind enough to show her how to get there. Willem ends up agreeing to be her guide since he's got nothing better to do, but neither of them really knows where they're going, so they end up getting lost almost immediately. But on the bright side, Kathle gets to see a lot of the better parts of the city and have a little fun too. Several hours later, they finally arrive at the highest point in the city. And the reason she came here is because she has always wanted to see a view like this. She thanks Willem for making today so special for her, since she can finally leave with no regrets, and just then, Willem notices 3 armed men behind them and it looks like they are here for her. Kathle takes one final look at the sunset before turning to Willem to thank him for such a memorable day, after which she goes over to the men who came to get her. Willem can obviously tell that this situation is strange, but he'd rather mind his own business than get involved in someone else's drama. Later that night, Willem goes to meet one of his friends, Grick, at the pub and asks how his other buddy, Anara, is doing. But unfortunately, Grick tells him that Anara messed up this morning and got himself eaten on the surface. Willem doesn't really know what to say at this point, so he apologizes for bringing it up, but Grick says there is nothing to be sorry about since they are salvager and all salvagers have to be willing to accept death when they go out for treasure. Willem still looks upset, so Grick tries to cheer him up by telling him he's got some good news to share. He's got a great job lined up and Willem is intrigued at first. But when Grick mentions that it involves working for the military, he loses all interest. Grick tells him it'll be a good opportunity to make a lot of money, but Willem brushes him off and says he appreciates Grick looking out for him, but he doesn't want to get another job. He knows Willem is still dealing with the guilt from his past and can't bring himself to pursue happiness, but he's got to learn to move on with his life. Since Grick is being so insistent, Willem decides to go along with it and says he will do the job, so he asks for the details. Grick is excited and tells him it's a really easy gig since all he has to do is act as the caretaker for some special weapons in a military warehouse. That sounds shady, but Willem already decided he was going to go through with it, so later that night he arrives on the island where he will be fulfilling his caretaker duties. However, as he is walking towards the warehouse, he suddenly gets attacked by a little girl with a stick, and even though he could easily dodge her, when she loses her balance, he chooses to save her instead. So he ends up falling in the muddy water instead. Just then, the girl Willem met earlier today comes up running up and she's shocked to see him here. Willem is equally shocked to see her and he has a lot of questions, but right now he's soaking wet and dirty, so he wants to get cleaned up first. Willem is taken to the warehouse where he has a shower. Now he has even more questions since this place seems way too nice to be a warehouse. Once he's done, he is stressed and walks out, but to his horror, he finds Niglato standing outside the door. He tries to act like he didn't see her, but she excitedly grabs him since she's so happy to see him again. Willem and hope to avoid Niglato for the rest of his life, but unfortunately she works here too, so Willem is going to be stuck with her from now on. Niglato decides to show Willem around a little and explains that this warehouse is run jointly by the Military and Merchants Guild, and she's here as the guild representative, so obviously Willem is the military's representative. And personally, Niglato thinks he looks really good in his uniform, but hearing compliments from her just makes him worried that she might eat him. She pours him a cup of tea and assures him that while she may find him delectable, he's the last of his kind, so she would never be so impatient as to gobble him up immediately. That is unless he wants to give her permission to eat him. Niglato is really desperate, so she'd settle for gobbling an arm, a finger, or maybe even Willem's juicy meat, but Willem shuts her down immediately. Anyway, Willem changes the subject and asks Niglato what his job as a caretaker is. But she informs him that he doesn't really have to do much. In fact, the last 2 military caretakers never actually showed up on this island, so if Willem wants, she can help him arrange accommodations elsewhere. Willem tells her that won't be necessary since he actually plans on doing his job, plus he doesn't trust Niglato enough to let her arrange his accommodations anyway. Niglato calls him mean for not trusting her, but it's hard to blame him since Niglato quite literally loves devouring people. That aside, Niglato glad Willem is really going to stay here since it means she can take care of him again. But while Niglato is staring at Willem all cutesy, he needs to remind himself that when she asked if she could gobble his meat, she probably meant that in the literal sense. Just to make sure he isn't in any danger, he asks Niglato if she intends to eat him, and she answers that while she does want to get a taste of his meat in more ways than one, she won't do it unless he gives her permission. Willem acts like he didn't hear that and instead asks Niglato for some information about what kind of job this is. Because from what he knows, he is meant to be taking care of some special weapons, but he hasn't seen anything like that around. Niglato understands why Willem is confused, so she goes over to the door and opens it, revealing 4 little girls who had been eavesdropping, and tells him that these are the special weapons Willem will be taking care of. The next morning, Willem is introduced to all the children that live here, and he's wondering when the child labor laws got repealed because it makes no sense to him how these kids would be considered military weapons. Regardless of the ethics of the situation, he is still meant to be here caretaker, so he tries to make a good first impression on them. However, all the kids are definitely scared of him for some reason, so whenever he tries to get close to them, they mostly run or hide. Just then, Niglato licks him on the cheek and says the serious look on his face made him look so delicious, so she couldn't stop herself from tasting him. While a little disturbing, Niglato's inappropriate actions did give Willem an idea of how to win over the kids. He heads over to the kitchen and girls follow him to see what he's up to, but they are surprised that Willem can cook so well. When he's done, he holds out a spoon for Kathle to taste the food he made, but she's too embarrassed to do it. So Nefren tastes it instead, and she absolutely loves it. Step 1 of Willem's plan is finally done, so he moves on to step 2, and uses his sauce to make some delicious pudding for the kids. The kids absolutely love the dessert, and where they were avoiding him before, now they are pretty much flocking to him. A little while later, he's outside watching some of the girls play with one another, but while chasing after a ball, Almeda falls off a cliff. None of her friends really seem to care though, so Willem runs down to check if she's alright. Almeda is clearly not alright, but she kinda just awkwardly laughs about nearly getting herself killed and hobbles over to get the ball despite her severe concussion. Willem is starting to realize that something is off about these girls, so after treating Almeda's wounds, he asks Niglato for a proper explanation. Niglato asks him if he's sure he really wants to know, because once she tells him the truth about the girls, he won't be able to look at them the same way ever again. Willem is already well aware of the 17 beasts that roam the surface, so Niglato leads Willem down into the basement where the weapons used to fight those beasts are kept. Willem is shocked to see this since these are all dug weapons used by the human braves centuries ago, and the only people capable of wielding the weapons are human. But the beasts wiped out almost all life on the surface, including the human, so all the surviving species were forced to live on various floating islands. Normally there would be no one left to use the dug weapons, but that's when Niglato informs Willem that those girls are a special species of fairies called Leprechauns, and they have mimicked humans for so many years that are practically the same as humans, and as such they are capable of using the dug weapons. And to make them effective weapons, the girls have been raised to have no regard for their own lives, so they would happily march to their deaths at any time. In fact, Willem is informed that Kathle and Althea are out on a mission right now, so he heads to the port to wait for their return since he's worried about them. Thankfully, the two of them return in one piece, but while Althea seems to be perfectly fine, Kathle is out cold. Willem carries Kathle back home, and when she finally wakes up, she's surprised to see Willem sitting at her bedside. She asked him why he's here, but he says he's the caretaker here, so it's natural for him to take care of her. Kathle still insists that he doesn't need to bother himself with looking after her, especially since she doesn't have much time left. Willem asks what she means by that, but Kathle explains that in 5 days Island 15 will be attacked by a beast. Normally, beasts wouldn't be able to reach any of the Sky Islands, but this one in particular can release part of its body to attack the islands in the sky. Willem asks how she's sure that the beast will attack in 5 days, but after centuries of fighting beasts, the people of this era have developed ways to predict their attacks. And by using her dug weapon at max output, Kathle can generate enough energy to blow herself up and take the beast out with her. She's not happy about it, but she feels that it's necessary to make sure no one else has to die, so she asks Willem if he would grant her a final wish before she dies. She blurts out that she wants a kiss, but then she realizes that she said that out loud, so she rolls over in embarrassment. She doesn't want to talk anymore, but Willem rules her over, and just like she wanted, he gives her a kiss on the forehead, but still a kiss. Kathle is so shocked that she barely felt the kiss, so she's about to ask him to give her another one, but Willem is already rolling her on her back and taking her shirt off. He explains that the reason Kathle felt so weak after coming back is because she used too much venom, and it's causing muscle soreness, but a good massage should fix it. After Kathle falls asleep, Willem heads to the records room to search for anything that will allow Kathle to survive her mission, but this place is an unorganized mess, so it's going to take a while. Nephrin notices Willem hard at work and she feels like helping him out, so she offers to assist him with his search. By the next morning, Kathle is finally awake and she is hit with a second wave of embarrassment after she recalls how she asked Willem to kiss her yesterday. She eventually overcomes the cringe and decides to get out of bed. But just as she is heading out the door to go look for Willem, some of the other kids tell her that Willem is sleeping with Nephrin. It's technically true, but they could have worded it better since Willem is just letting Nephrin sleep on his lap because she was up all night helping him. Kathle asks what they were doing here, so Willem explains that he was looking for the records for a way to prevent Kathle from having to blow herself up during her mission. By hearing this upsets her, so she tells him she doesn't need his pity. This is the only way for them to defeat the beast, and she has already made her mind up to go through with it. Willem can see that she isn't willing to compromise on it, so he asked if she wants to have a little training match with him so he can prove his point. Kathle is confused by his request, but she goes along with it anyway, although she warns Willem that fairies like her are the only people who can wield the dug weapons properly. Willem ignores her warning, so the match begins and Kathle intends to end it in one swing. However, a second later she lands face first in the dirt. She keeps attacking Willem and Willem keeps flexing his skill on her, while he gives a lecture about how ignorant she is about the dug weapons. This is a sword, not a self-destruct bomb, so the fact that she has been fighting with it without knowing how to use a sword is surprising. Willem tells her she could just learn to fight the beast normally instead of resorting to blowing herself up, but Kathle refuses to listen to him and insists that blowing herself up is the only way to keep everyone safe. She is still in denial, but Willem says the fact that she lost to him means she is sorely lacking in technique. But her power, stamina, and fighting instincts are pretty good, so he's sure she can improve enough to come back from her mission alive. And now that he has proved his point, Willem proceeds to pass out. While his unconscious Willem has a flashback to the day he Ebon Candle, and even Ebon Candle was surprised that Willem could do something like this. But he also mocked him because all the spells Willem used in the fight are surely going to come back to haunt him, a curse, so he wouldn't survive. However, Ebon Candle will be able to revive himself eventually, so while Willem may win the battle, he ultimately lost the war. And as Willem comes to terms with his fate, he apologizes to his friends Lilia, Suam, Almeria for not being able to protect them. A little while later, Willem wakes up in the infirmary with Niglado looking after him, and she's really worried because while he was out, she ran some tests on him and discovered that Willem's body is practically falling apart, but he tells her it's due to his past. Niglado notices the girls trying to sneak in since they are worried about Willem too, so she takes him aside and explains his story. Years ago, Niglado was part of a salvager group, and while on the surface one day she came across a man petrified and frozen in ice. It took him back to one of the Sky Islands so they could undo the petrification curse. But when Willem finally woke up, he went into a frenzy because he did not know what was going on. Eventually they managed to calm him down so they could tell him about the current state of the world. Humans had turned all other races against them, but they kept fighting, so eventually they were wiped out entirely, leaving Willem as the last human alive. Niglado was worried that the kids might turn against Willem since most people hate humans, but they're actually really interested in hearing about his past. While the others do that, Kathle flies off because she has a lot to think about. Later that night, Willem is out in the field doing some maintenance on Kathle's dug weapon to relax himself when all of a sudden Kathle returns. She asks him what he's doing with her weapons, so Willem decides to put on a little show for her. It disassembles the dug sword for tuning and explains that all those tiny fragments are talismans that were stuck together to form a blade. Although most of the individual talismans are pretty useless, they do things like give directions to the north, prevent nightmares, or stop you from getting burned. But their true power comes from the wielder chaining talismans together to create entirely new effects. Kathle tells Willem that she's willing to learn his way of fighting, and Willem is glad to hear it, so Get offers to make a deal with Kathle. If she gets stronger and manages to come back alive, then he will do anything she wants. Upon hearing this, Kathle sits up and is about to say something, but Willem already knows what she's about to say, so he tells her she isn't allowed to ask him for anything lewd. She's a little disappointed, but she's another wish in mind and tells Willem she wants him to bake a cake for her if she comes back alive. But she's going to need his help to make sure she can survive, and Willem is more than happy to train her. 2 weeks have now passed since Kathle and the others went on their mission, and they haven't heard any news about the girls. So Willem is starting to get anxious that they might have died in battle after all. Niglotto can see that he is worried, so Get his mind off it. She asked him if he wants to do a small job for her. One of the little girls, Tayet, is due for a checkup up at the Corna di Luca General Hospital for a routine checkup. So Willem and Tayet get on an airship and head for the Corna di Luca island. It takes a whole day of travel. When they finally get there, Tayet is really excited because she loves seeing new places. Willem asks her if she wants to do a little sightseeing since she doesn't come here often, but Tayet declined because this is a serious trip, so she'd never want to do something as silly as go sightseeing. Although Willem can tell that Tayet is just trying to act like an adult, so he makes a compromise and says he wants to take a look around while they walk to the hospital together. Tayet is overjoyed to hear, so the two start taking the scenic route to the hospital, and Tayet is loving every single landmark they come across. They use spot a fountain with an urban legend that says couples who come here will be happy for 5 years. Although it doesn't look like the legend is working for that dude who just got smacked. Just then, they hear a commotion happening over in the market, so they head over and see 2 thugs destroying a rabbit stall. They keep chanting something about annihilation, but Willem isn't really want to get involved, so when the thugs try to flee from the police, he just trips them up and leaves them to be captured by the police. It's getting pretty late, so Willem tells Tayet that they need to start heading to the hospital soon, and even though she's disappointed that she can't have any more fun, she sucks it up and heads in for her examination. While Tayet is still being examined, the doctor comes up to Willem and tells him there's nothing out of the ordinary with Tayet, and that's good to hear, but Willem still doesn't know what the purpose of this checkup, so asks the doctor for an explanation. The doctor explains that not all fairies are capable of using dug weapons. To those who awaken the ability to do so are brought here for an examination and tuning so they can become fairy soldiers. A little while later, Tayet is done with the checkup, but she's going to have to stay here overnight so she can be tuned, whatever that's supposed to mean. The nurse tells Willem that the procedure will be done by noon tomorrow. So Willem asks Tayet if she'll be fine staying here by herself. Tayet tells him he doesn't have to worry about her, but she's curious about where Willem will be sleeping since he can't stay here. Willem tells her that there's a special rest house preserved for officers like him. And as it turns out, being their caretaker puts him pretty high in the military rankings. His rank as a technical officer, and with that rank comes the perk of this amazing room in the local military, so Willem spends the night here, and the next day he prepares to go pick Tayet up. However, as he's about to leave the base, he accidentally bumps into a dog woman. This was clearly an accident, so he tries to move on and continue with his plans, but the woman stops him because she has a favorite ask. She wants to know if Willem can help her get in touch with Limeskin since there's something she needs to discuss with him. But Willem tells her that Limeskin is currently with Kathle and the others fighting a beast, and a magic barrier was put up around the area, so communications would be impossible. Just then, here's some soldiers panicking because they just received some news about the mission Kathle was sent on, and to his horror, they tell him that the mission was a failure. Willem falls to his knees in tears of the realization that Kathle and the others most likely died in battle. However, even though the mission was a failure, it turns out that Kathle and the others are actually still alive. So the second Willem sees them, he runs to hug Kathle as fast as he can. During that battle, all the training Willem gave Kathle was really paying off since she was dominating the battlefield all on her own. So the mission was on track to be successful, but unexpectedly a second beast appeared out of nowhere. And this one was much stronger than the initial threat, so Limeskin ordered everyone to retreat and declared this mission a failure since there was no way they could win at this point. However, Kathle refused to accept that since she promised Willem that she would win and come back alive. So in order to make sure they don't lose to the beast, she was prepared to charge back alone. But as she approaches, she begins seeing horrifying visions that stop her in her tracks. In the end, they had a retreat after all, and they were forced to crash the entire island to get rid of the beast. But Willem is just glad they all made it back alright. Limeskin commends Willem for the training he gave Kathle because it really made a difference in her compatibility. However, Kathle doesn't seem too happy about it since she feels responsible for the mission's failure. She thinks they could have saved the island if she had just blown herself up like originally planned, but Nephron points out that even if she had done that, the second beast that appeared would have still forced them to abandon the island. So them all making it back alive was the best possible outcome. Kathle agrees that Nephron makes a good point, but that aside, she asks why Nephron has been sitting on Willem's lap this entire time. Nephron says she's doing it to make Willem feel better, but really she's just doing it because she likes sitting in his lap. Just then, Fur runs into the room because she has some urgent matters to talk to Limeskin about. She shows him a letter from the group known as the Annihilation Knights, and they are threatening to assassinate her father, the mayor, because they don't like his new policies. The mayor has been working on creating laws that prevent discrimination based on someone's race. But the Annihilation Knights hate the idea of that, so they will do anything to stop it. She wants Limeskin to help her stop the Annihilation Knights, but unfortunately, Limeskin says he can't help her. His position as a high-ranking military officer means he's not allowed to get involved in any political disputes, but he does know someone who might be able to help her. He looks over to Willem and is about to ask him for help, but Willem cuts him off and says he doesn't want to do it. Fur starts pleading with Willem to reconsider, but he ignores her and starts walking away because he still has to go pick Tie It Up. Fur keeps following him around and trying to convince him to help stop the Annihilation Knights. But as much as Fur believes she's in the right, Willem can't just go and take them out because they sent out a threatening letter. Eventually, they all arrive at the hospital to pick Tie It Up, and she looks perfectly fine. Although she's been permanently traumatized by all the needles they injected her with, since they got some time before their airship arrives to take them home, so Willem decides to continue their tour so Tie It can have a little more fun. Fur has still been tagging along with the group this whole time, but while she still wants Willem to help her, she's incredibly passionate about the city, so she gives up on asking for help and offers to give them a tour around Corna di Luca. While Fur shows them around, Willem notices that someone has been following them for a while and he has a bad feeling about this. So he asks Fur if she can take them to an attraction that is a little more secluded. Fur doesn't know why you want to go to an unpopular spot, but she goes along with his request and leads them all to an old wishing well in a back alley. Once they are away from the rest of the public, the people who were following them reveal them as the Annihilation Knights, and they say they are here to kidnap Fur so they can blackmail the mayor into stepping down. Willem couldn't act before because there wasn't enough justification, but attempting to kidnap someone in broad daylight gives him a pretty good reason to get involved now. So if he proceeds to take the Annihilation Knights down one after the other and leave them to be arrested by the police, so the Annihilation Knights' problem is pretty much resolved. Afterwards, he and the girls head for the port so they can go home, but at the gate Willem finds a man waiting for him. He says there's someone who wants to meet Willem, but Willem isn't interested in any meetings right now. When the man mentions the name Suwam, Willem is forced to agree to the meeting. After a long trip, the girls finally return home and Niglato is elated to see them all back in one piece instead of in chunks, but Kathle doesn't seem like she's in mood. She had planned to surprise Willem by making it home safely, but the surprise has already been ruined, and now he's not even here to celebrate with her. Meanwhile, the great sage Suwam is being led to the meeting room and is informed that there's a man waiting for him who is capable of tuning dug weapons. Suwam doesn't believe it at first since there's only one man who is capable of tuning dug weapons and he's long dead by now. However, to his utter shock, he sees that man sitting right in front of him. Willem is glad to see Suwam again after so many years, and Suwam has a lot of questions to ask, so they sit down to catch up one another. Willem explains that he was petrified on the surface for 500 years, but he was found and revived. However, Willem is curious to find out how Suwam is still alive since 500 years have passed. Suwam reveals a mass of dark energies swirling in his chest where his heart should be. On the day of their final battle, Suwam was killed along with Amissa, but just before he died, he placed a curse on himself to stay alive. Now he can no longer die of injury or old age, but he can't call himself a human anymore. But even with his current circumstances, Suwam is actually pretty happy with his life. Oh, he doesn't want Willem to feel sorry for him. Willem is just happy that his close friend is still alive, but he is quite surprised that Amissa and of all people died in that battle because he was sure that if anyone could survive that calamity it would have been her. Willem, Suwam and Amissa used to be practically inseparable back when they were kids. Willem is glad he got the chance to reminisce with an old friend, but Suwam is in a bit of a dilemma because he doesn't know what to do with Willem now. Willem is the only person capable of tuning the dug weapons, so he's a perfect fit for the caretaker role, but Suwam would have loved to give Will a higher position in the military though. Willem isn't really concerned with his position in the military, so he tells Suwam he will have to wait till next time because he made a promise to Kathle, and he plans to return as soon as possible so he can fulfill it. However, before he could leave, Willem tells him that there's someone he wants him to meet, so he ends up dragging him all the way over Island 2. Meanwhile back home, Kathle is still suffering from those terrifying visions, and they seem to be getting worse. Over on Island 2, Willem introduces Willem to this disembodied skull, and Willem is confused at first, but he soon recognizes it to be the same Ebon Candle he killed 500 years ago. Ebon Candle begins a long evil monologue after he recognizes Willem, but Willem isn't listening to all that, so he tells Ebon Candle on to just skip the dialogue. What he really wants to hear about is what Ebon Candle is back as a skeleton skull. So Ebon Candle explains that he has the ability to resurrect himself, but when Willem defeated him, his entire body was burnt to ash, leaving him as nothing but a skull, and Ebon Candle has been using his powers non-stop ever since he resurrected to help keep the islands floating, so he hasn't had a chance to start regenerating his body. Thanks to Ebon Candle and Willem's combined power, they managed to raise several islands into the sky and keep them floating so the population to escape the beasts, and by chance, the islands have managed to stay afloat for the last 500 years, but now that Willem is back, they won't have to run anymore. If he can tune all the dug weapons, then they will be able to fight at full capacity to defeat the beasts and reclaim the surface, no matter how many fairy soldiers they need to use. That last statement doesn't sit right with Willem, so he grabs Willem by the neck and demands to know if he's the one who came up with the idea to have the fairy girls blow themselves up to fight. In Willem's defense, he had no other choice since the fairies are the only ones who can use the dug weapons, and while that may be true, Willem still doesn't agree with the idea of trying to reclaim the surface by using fairies as disposable weapons. Willem knows his methods might seem cruel, but those girls aren't really alive in the first place. Is a necromancy skill that allows him to give a body a ghost to wander with lingering regrets, and as ghosts they have no fear of death, making them the perfect candidates to fight with the dug weapons. Although if one of them uses too much energy at once, there's a chance that their memories of their tragic past life might return and cause their mind to break, and coincidentally, a report comes in at that exact moment, informing them that Kathle's past memories returned and it has left her brain dead. Willem immediately leaves to go check on Kathle, and when he finally gets back, he finds that she is indeed a vegetable now and blames himself for this because he never managed to keep his promise to her after all. Meanwhile, inside Kathle's shattered mindscape, she comes face to face with her past self named Elk. By this point, she had lost all her sense of who she is or why she would want to continue alive, so she would normally be doomed to wander this realm aimlessly forever. However, she recalls the promise she made to Willem that she wouldn't let herself die, so she regains her self-awareness and returns to her body. At the same time, Willem had been sitting next to Kathle's bed with Niglado all night, and he is still blaming himself for what happened to Kathle. He has lived through enough tragedy to know that not everything can be fixed, but even so he still wanted to make Kathle happy. However, he clearly failed at that, so he wonders why Kathle ever liked him in the first place. Just then, he hears Kathle's voice as she tells him that she has a lot of reasons to like him. He was the first person to help her when they first met, he was the first to show her a way of fighting that didn't involve sacrificing her life, and he was the first person she ever fell in love with. Willem is at a loss for words, but he is so happy that Kathle is alright that he embraces her, and Kathle breaks down in tears. The next day, Willem begins training some of the other girls in the front yard, and Kathle seems to be doing a little better, but for some reason her hair has started changing color. Elsewhere on one of the surface surveillance ships, two fairy soldiers, Noft and Ron, are in their room while Ron takes a look at some of the ancient books they found on their recent expedition. The book says that humans were never meant to exist in this world in the first place, but they were brought here by the gods, and eventually the humans created the beasts and their misguided pursuits, leading to the destruction of the surface's world. That's all Ron could read from the book since she doesn't understand the old human language well. But before she could come to any conclusion, there's a knock at the door and it turns out to be Grick, so he introduces himself to the two and tells them that he's a salvager. Back at the warehouse, everyone is glad to see that Kathle isn't a vegetable anymore. But since this is the first time a fairy has ever recovered from a mind break, she wants to run some tests on Kathle to make sure she's really alright. Niglado runs a couple tests on Kathle's blood, but even after the tests she still has no idea what's happening to Kathle. Kathle asks if there's something wrong with her, but Niglado tells her that there's nothing particularly wrong with her body. The only point of concern is that when Niglado ran the silver blood test that detects spirits, there was no reaction with Kathle's blood. Fairies are technically spirits, so normally Kathle's blood should have immediately turned black, but since it didn't react, at least scientifically, Kathle is no longer a fairy. Kathle asks if that's the reason her hair changed color as well, but Niglado has no way of confirming that. She'll need to run a few more tests, but for now she tells Kathle that she doesn't need to worry since her body is perfectly healthy. However, she warns Kathle not to use her dub weapon for a while since there's no telling what kind of reaction her body might have to it. Kathle understands, but she's not sure what to do with herself if she's not allowed to fight. So Niglato suggests she could try getting Willem to fall for her. She pretty much confessed to him last night anyway, so if she wants him to stay with her forever then she's going to have to go all the way. Kathle decides to take Niglato's advice and starts learning how to do household chores and hopes that it will get her close to Willem and make him think of her as wife material. But while she's doing that, Willem and Niglato go to have a meeting with Limeskin. Limeskin is currently under suspension over the failed defense attempt with Kathle, but he wanted to discuss what they are going to do about her responsibilities. Right now, Kathle can't genetically be considered a fairy, but according to military protocol, she's still on active duty, so there will be problems if she ends up being called to action. Niglato asks if Limeskin could do something to get Kathle taken off the roster for now, and normally he would be able to, but if an order comes from someone who outranks him there's nothing he can do. Just then, Willem comes up with an idea and asks the two of them if they know the great sage Suwam. They tell him that everyone knows him as he holds the most powerful in the military, so Willem tells Niglato to write a report specifically mentioning Willem's name and saying he wants to be given full authority over Kathle. He's sure Suwam is going to approve it to get on Willem's good sides again. But there's still the problem of finding someone to replace Kathle since Athea and Nephrin won't be able to handle threats on their own and the rest of the girls aren't ready to fight yet. Niglato informs Willem that there are actually two more active duty fairies, Noft and Ron, but they are currently stationed on a salvage ship as security. However, as we check in on Noft and Ron, we see that the salvage group they are guarding is currently under attack by a beast. The regular soldiers try shooting at it, but their bullets do absolutely nothing, so the beast begins slaughtering them one by one. Grick has had a few run insurance with beasts like this, so he pulls one of the soldiers behind cover and warns him to stay silent because this beast reacts to sound and motion, so if everyone just stays perfectly still they will be fine. Unfortunately, the dumb-ass captain decides to start up the ship to ditch all the salvagers and escape, but as it turns out, starting up a ship involves a lot of noise and motion, so it gets the attention of the beast, and it's crazy how the beast grew arms just so it could start boxing the ship, but luckily, Noft catches up to it and uses her dug weapon to slice it to bits. Most of the crew manage to survive, but with their ship destroyed they are pretty much stuck on the surface until help arrives. On the bright side, Grick tells the girls that they won't have to worry about fighting any more beasts for a while since that one was of the fourths, and those kinds of beasts usually don't live near one another, so there shouldn't be any more in the area. Back in the sky, Willem is ordered to head to the 45th island to be debriefed on the situation. He's informed their rescue mission has been approved to recover the fallen salvage crew, and he's to send one fairy soldier to help. But the transport ship they would normally use is being remodeled, so it'll take 15 days to get it ready. Willem asks why they don't just use a smaller ship to rescue the crew as soon as possible, but his superior explains that the crew was a crew of salvagers, and they were carrying a ton of valuable relics and antiques from the human ruins, so they need a large ship to carry it all back. Willem knows he won't be able to convince his superiors change his mind about this, but he reminds him that if they wait 15 days then the chances of the crew being attacked by beasts are much higher. However, the superior says there are two fairy soldiers with the crew, so they should be able to protect everything even if it means sacrificing themselves in the process. Willem is enraged to hear his superior talk about the fairies as if their lives are worthless, but he maintains his composure and says he has a favor to ask. Afterwards, Willem heads outside to meet Kathle, who has been waiting for him. He tells her he's going to send Nephrin on the rescue mission but will personally accompany her this time because he is sick of sending the girls into dangerous situations without him. There's also another reason he wants to go. Since the salvage team found a dug weapon with the ability to keep the user's mind in perfect condition. He knows Kathle won't admit it, but he can tell that the disintegration had some lasting effects on her, and here is a no telling when it might get worse, so he wants to use the sword to help her. Kathle is glad that Willem is worrying about her, but she doesn't want to let him risk his life alone, so she says she will go with him. Willem is firmly against the idea since Kathle genetically isn't a fairy anymore, so she can't fight, and besides there's no way his superior would ever authorize her to go on the mission with him. However, later that day, Kathle manages to get authorization to accompany Willem on the mission, and she's really happy about. But Willem points out that the only reason she was authorized is because his superior thought Kathle was his lover. When Willem introduced her, his superior thought he wanted to bring Kathle along for some naughty fun. He doesn't like the fact that he's being misunderstood here, but Kathle says she doesn't mind the misunderstanding and would happily do that stuff for Willem if he asked, but Willem shuts her down. The next morning, Kathle is in the kitchen making breakfast and Willem is sleeping in the library again, so Althea comes to wake him up. She warns him that he's going to be late for breakfast if he doesn't get up soon, so Willem wakes up, but he accidentally knocks Nefren onto the floor since she was sleeping on top of him. When Kathle finds out that Willem was sleeping with Nefren again, she gets mad, but Willem defends himself and says Nefren snuck on top of him while he was asleep, so he didn't know she was there. However, Kathle knows that BS since Willem can sense incoming threats even in his sleep, so that means he willingly let Nefren get close to him. Willem still doesn't see what the big deal is since Nefren is perfectly harmless, so Kathle asks if he would have let Niglado get that close to him. Willem tells her that Niglado is different since there's a very real threat that she might eat him. But if that's the case, then Kathle asks what he would have done if she tried to get on top of him. Willem doesn't want to lie, so he tells her that since she's a woman, he would have gotten embarrassed and kicked her out of the room immediately. But for some reason this response actually makes Kathle happy. He's incredibly confused, so he goes to ask Niglado for some advice, and she tells him that Kathle is happy specifically because he thinks of her as a woman, and that means she's got a good chance as Niglado's rival in love. Willem is confused again because there's nothing going on between him and Niglado, but Niglado tells him that she likes him quite a bit. And since she's a troll, her species is compatible with Willem, so they could probably start a family together, and honestly, nothing would make Niglado happier than being with Willem, but she chose not to pursue him for Kathle's sake. Willem is stunned and doesn't know how to respond to Niglado's confession, but she doesn't expect a response and tells him they can just pretend like they never had this conversation. After that, Willem heads outside and notices all the girls looking up at the sky. Kathle explains that there's a meteor shower happening, so they are really excited to see it. And while Willem is watching the shower too, she decides to finally make a move and nervously tries to hold Willem's hand. But to her surprise, Willem beats her to it and holds her hand instead. There's a good chance she might actually get a happy ending here despite the blue hair romance failure rate. But the moment is ruined when one of the girls falls off the edge of the balcony. Willem races to save Almeda, but he's too slow, so Kathle uses her wings to fly forward and catch her. Thanks to that, Almeda is fine, but Willem is really upset that Kathle used her powers in her current condition. He warns her that generating venom like that could cause her mental disintegration to get even worse, and he doesn't want to lose her. Kathle assures him that she's perfectly fine, but later that night while she's in the shower, she starts having more visions of her past life, causing her hair to become even more red. Kathle heads out to try and clear her head, but she is still having those strange visions, and they have become even more vivid than they were before. Just then, she hears someone approaching, so she turns around and sees Althea standing there, but all of a sudden Althea asks Kathle who she is. Kathle thinks that's a strange question to ask since she and Althea have known each other their entire lives. But she thinks Althea is just messing around, so she plays along and tells Althea that her name is Kathle. Althea is glad to see that Kathle still remembers who she is, so she gets down and tells her that she needs to ignore all those visions of her past life. Because the more she focuses on them, the worse her mental disintegration will become until she forgets who she is altogether. And she knows this from personal experience because isn't actually the real Althea. The real Althea suffered from mental disintegration after the memories from her past life resurfaced, and it ate away at her consciousness until eventually all that was left were the memories of her past life. That's when the current Althea woke up, and to her it felt like she'd just woken up in someone else's body. She was extremely confused, so she began to search around the room to figure out what was going on, and that's when she came across the original Althea's diary. The original Althea had kept a diary of every day of her life up till the point that disintegration happened. To the current Althea came to realize that the original Althea is gone and she has replaced her. She felt incredibly guilty for causing the original Althea's death, so she scored to do her best to become the same person and live her life the same way the original Althea would have, and to this day, no one ever realized the current Althea isn't the original. Kathle's disintegration may be slow, but there's a high chance it will keep getting worse until one day she's no longer herself, so Kathle decides to just try to enjoy all the time she is left with Willem while she can. She and Althea start walking back home together, and Althea asks if it doesn't bother her, and that the original Althea is gone. But as far as Kathle is concerned, Althea is the same person she's always known and loved, so she will always be her friend. The next morning, Kathle seems to be full of energy as she runs through the halls while cleaning. Niglado comes out to see what all the noise is about, and she's shocked when she sees that Kathle's hair has become even more red. She knows this is a bad sign, but since Kathle is trying to stay positive, she doesn't say anything and compliment her on the new hair color. Kathle has accepted the fact that her mental disintegration may get worse, so right now, she wants to live her life of the fullest. A little while later, Willem is having tea with Naglato and Kathle, and he's a little worried about the rescue mission. So he asks if Noft and Ron are going to be fine since they've been stuck on the surface for a while now and they probably have to fight a lot of beasts. But Naglato thinks they should be alright, especially since the military is working around the clock to get the ship ready for the rescue mission. Meanwhile, over at the camp, Noft notices Ron is up late reading the ancient book, so she comes over to sit beside her. She asks if Ron managed to decipher any more of the book's text, so Ron tells her that she found something about what the humans did to the surface. But Noft isn't actually interested in that, so she falls asleep on Ron's shoulder. Late into the night, Willem is still awake working on the plans for the rescue mission, so Kathle comes into his room to bring him some tea. While she's here, she asks Willem if he would be willing to teach her some of the things he does, like how to tune the dug weapons or how to do the massage for venom poisoning. Willem doesn't mind, but he warns her that those skills take a lot of time and effort to learn, and he doesn't want her to push herself too much. She's been trying to hide it, but Willem noticed that she's been losing her memories recently. She's been forgetting little things like names or previous conversations, but once he gets his hands on the lapide dug weapon, he's sure they can stop her mind from deteriorating. The next morning, the ship is ready, so Willem, Nefren, and Kathle prepare to head out on a rescue mission. Once they arrive at the salvage team camp, they meet Noft and Ron, and while all the injured crew members are being loaded onto the rescue ship, Ron greets Nefren and Kathle since it has been a while since they last saw each other. It's nice to see them again, but Ron is a little confused by Kathle's new hair color as well as the fact that there is a random man with them. This is the first time they've met, so Willem introduces himself to Ron and tells her that he's the new fairy warehouse caretaker. Since Willem doesn't have any animal features, Ron thinks he might be a troll like Naglato, maybe even her husband, but Willem corrects her and says he is just a human. Neither Ron or Noft believe that Willem is really a human. Willem doesn't really want to waste time trying to prove it to them, so he changes the subject and says there's something he wants to do for them. A few minutes later, Noft is lying on a table while Willem gives her a massage to deal with her venom poisoning from all the fighting she did, and Noft absolutely loves it, but Ron refuses to sit back and watch her friend get touched. However, a moment later Willem is touching Ron, and as much as she wants to stop him, she's really enjoying a massage. So much so that she's making inappropriate noises, and Willem is starting to feel a little uncomfortable because of it. When he's eventually done, Noft thanks Willem for his massage since she feels a lot better now, and Ron begrudgingly admits that Willem's technique was effective, but she's never letting him do it again. Willem can tell that Ron is having a hard time trusting him, and she says that's because he's a human. He's species that released these 17 beasts into the world, so it's natural for her to dislike him. After the appearance of the beasts, the landscape of the world was completely destroyed in a matter of weeks. But to this day, no one knows how the beasts managed to reproduce so quickly or how they exist in the first place. There's a possibility that they are some kind of failed bioweapon made by the humans. But for that to be the case, something must have been used as a hose to grow and construct them. Kathle thinks it's ironic that the beasts are bioweapons made for the sole purpose of fighting, because that's the exact same reason fairies were made, with the only difference being that they fight the beasts. Until Ron knows the whole truth about the beasts and the role humans had in their creation, she can't bring herself to trust Willem, so she walks away. Noft, on the other hand, kind of likes Willem, but since Ron is walking away as her friend, she goes with her. Willem doesn't want to sit around all day, so he says he wants to go over to the ruined site and see what's going on over there. But he strictly forbids Kathle from coming with him since he doesn't want her to push herself too hard. Kathle doesn't like it, but she promises to stay on the ship since Willem insists. But while he's gone, she happens to run into a couple of soldiers playing poker in one of the rooms. The soldiers recognize her as the secretary officer Willem came with, and in the military that can only mean one thing, so they start joking about Kathle probably giving Willem the Hawk Tuah treatment later tonight. Meanwhile, Willem arrives at the base camp and finds Grick yelling at his superior because he just sent a large group of people out to recover more items. The superior doesn't understand why Grick is so angry. So Grick explains that every time group of more than 7 has gone a solo expedition, they come back alive. The superior still isn't convinced and tells Grick that the items they could recover are far more important than some silly superstition. Willem already knows there's no way they can recall the expedition squad, so he tells Grick to just let it go and prepare in case something goes wrong. For now Willem heads back to the ship to check if the dug weapon he is looking for was stored there, and upon his return he finds that Kathle has been busy doing a lot of cleaning and the soldiers have taken a liking to her for her work ethic. She looks like she's having a good time, so Willem decides to leave her there and he'll look for the dog weapon by himself. All of a sudden, a massive earthquake hits, so everyone's put on guard, but Kathle is especially affected because the earthquake triggers one of her past memories and she sees the name Lilia flash through her head. Kathle has a flashback to her life as Elk in a blank room, and for some reason the hero, Lilia, smashed her way into room. Elk was confused, so she asked who Lilia was and what she was doing here. Every word out of Elk's mouth seemed to do significant damage to Lilia, but she answered that she was there to kill Elk and thereby save the world. Kathle wakes up a little while later and she still remembers who she is, so she tries to act like nothing happened and goes about her normal routine. She goes to bring Willem some food since he's been searching through the cargo hold all day. When she gets there, she finds him busy tuning Knopf's weapon. Once Willem notices Kathle, he informs her that he managed to find the lipid dug weapon, although he's going to need to do some tinkering with it before it's safe for Kathle to use. With this, they won't have to worry about her disintegration anymore, but right now there's something else Willem is concerned about. He's trying to tune Knopf's sword, but there's actually nothing wrong with it. This dug weapon is known as the Kinslayer, so is only capable of killing the kin of its creator. In other words, it can only kill humans. However, Knopf has been using the Kinslayer to kill beasts for a long time, so it makes no sense to him how she's been managing it. Just then, Willem is hit with a horrible realization. The Kinslayer is literally incapable of harming anything that isn't human. So if Knopf has been able to cut beasts with it, then that must mean the beasts are actually humans. The knowledge that his kind is directly responsible for all the suffering and chaos that this world has experienced completely breaks Willem, so he falls to his knees and hugs Kathle tight. Kathle feels really embarrassed and she doesn't know why Willem is doing this, but she can tell that he needs some emotional support, so she lets him hug her a little longer. This moment makes Willem realize something. Ever since he was revived from his petrification, he had been living an aimless life, but Kathle gave him a home to come back to, someone to protect, someone he wants to make happy. He swears that he will make her happy no matter what, so he looks her in the eyes and asks her to be with him forever. The next morning, Kathle wakes up and tries to go about her day as usual, but she can't get Willem's proposal out of her head, so she's still all giddy about it. Later that day, she's walking with Willem and things are really awkward between the two of them after the proposal Willem made yesterday. Willem finally breaks the silence and tells Kathle that he is serious about marrying her, but she already knew that, and tells him she'll be by his side forever. But before anything more can be said, they get called over by Grix since he has something he wants to show them. According to this legend, this world was once home to gods, but they were all destroyed after they tried to wipe out humanity. The first one is Carmen Lake, followed by Jade Nail, and lastly, there's Ebon Candle. So Ebon Candle was actually one of the gods. Willem mentions that he was the one who killed Ebon Candle, but Grix thinks he's making it up since he may be strong. But there's no way Willem could be a god slayer. For now Grix just moves on and tells Willem he has something else to show him. He leads him to the ruins of a house, and from what Willem had told him, this should be his childhood home. Willem begins having flashbacks to the past and the people he left behind, and he is filled with deep regret for never making it back home to them. All of a sudden, Kathle starts getting visions again, and it feels like something is calling out to her, but whatever it is coming from underground. Grix and Willem notice something is wrong with Kathle, so they ask if she's alright, but in the next second the ground beneath her feet crumbles, and they are all sent falling into unknown territory. At the same time, beasts begin to emerge from cracks and crevices all over the ruins, so Nephrin has to fly out and engage them to prevent unnecessary casualties. Meanwhile, down in the cave, everyone seems to be alright, but Kathle is still having visions, so she doesn't notice the giant boulder that's about to crush her. So Willem jumps in and pushes her out of the way before she gets hurt. Kathle finally snaps out of her daze and she's worried about Willem since he got hit by the rocks, but Willem says he's fine. More importantly, this place looks like the cave the scavenger team was sent in, and hopefully if they follow the torches they left on the walls, it should lead to the exit. However, as they follow the torches, all they find are the half-rotten remains of the scavenger team. It looks like a beast is responsible for this, and if the beast is still in this cave, and they might have a serious problem on their hands. The sight of the blood sparks another vision in Kathle's head, but this time she hears a voice calling out to her. So almost as if she's under a spell, she flies straight towards the voice, leaving Willem and Grix incredibly confused. They follow her through the cave until she arrives at a large opening with an ice crystal in the middle. Grick is surprised since there's a person inside the crystal, just like Willem was. Elk is inside the ice, and as Kathle touches it, her hair almost completely turns red. But before she could totally lose herself, Willem snaps her out of it. Grick and Willem notice the little girl in the ice, and Grick can't believe he found a person in ice again. But there's no chance that she's still alive because she has a massive hole through her chest. Willem recognizes the wounds to be a curse from dug weapon Seniorius, but Grick doesn't understand what's so special about it. Willem explains that Seniorius has a special curse imbued on it which can turn anyone, whether god or immortal, into a corpse. So if that curse was used on this girl, Willem is sure she couldn't have been a regular human. There are still a lot of unanswered questions, but right now this cave is on the verge of collapsing, so Grick points to the exit and tells them to hurry before they get trapped here. They manage to make it back to the ship alright, but the attack from the beasts left it severely damaged, so Willem's superior is going to have to fix it before they can get out of here. Meanwhile, Kathle's disintegration has gotten a lot worse, so she's become completely unresponsive. Inside Kathle's head she meets Elk again, and Elk is glad to see her. There's a story she wants to talk about, so she tells Kathle that a long time ago, humanity threatened to destroy the world, so 3 gods decide to lead an army to wipe them out. However, humanity managed to win the war after a human brave killed the leader of the gods, so there was no one left to stop the humans anymore. Elk was the leader of the gods, but she explains that she is also Kathle's original soul. Fairies like Kathle are made using the souls of children who are too young to realize that they are dead, so Kathle's entire existence is basically a dream. As such, it's only a matter of time before she fades from existence entirely, but Elk likes Kathle, so she brought her in here to preserve her memories. Meanwhile, outside beasts are currently attacking the ship, so Noft and Ron are forced to deal with them, but there are way more beasts than they expected, so they might not be able to make it out of this alive. Willem's superior successfully manages to fix the ship's engine, so he tells everyone to prepare for immediate takeoff so they can escape the beasts, but unfortunately the beast managed to breach the ship, so the people on board are now in serious danger. They try fighting back with guns, but one immediately gets a hole punched through his chest, and the others are about to suffer the same fate. However, luckily, Nephrin runs in and slices the beast's tentacles off. She then parries all the beast's subsequent attacks before slicing it in half, and once it's finally over, she falls to her knees in exhaustion. However, she doesn't have any time to rest because the beasts begin to regenerate and attack again. Meanwhile, Willem is still by Kathle's side, and he apologizes for failing to make her happy like he had promised, but all of a sudden, a beast smashes through the wall, so Willem decides to take his anger out on it. Meanwhile, inside Kathle's head, Elk asks Kathle if her memories and feelings are still intact, but Kathle barely remembers anything of her life. However, as long as her feelings stay intact, Elk says Kathle will continue to exist so she can stay here and watch the outside world. Willem goes on a rage-filled rampage through the ship, destroying all the beasts in his way. Willem has been fighting all his life because he wants to protect those close to him, but every single time he has tried to help, he always fails to save those who care about the most. The only thing he has ever been good at is fighting, so that's exactly what he's going to do. Elsewhere on the ship, some other soldiers are being attacked by a beast, but the last-second Nephrin arrives to save them. However, she's been fighting the beasts non-stop for a while now, and she's on the verge of collapse for her injuries, but she's still going to fight regardless. Meanwhile, outside Ron is doing her best to get rid of all the beasts on the exterior of the ship. But while she's distracted, the beast manages to grab her from behind and restrains her while another closes in for the kill. Ron desperately tries to get out of his grasp, but nothing she does is working, so she closes her eyes and waits for death. However, at the last second, Willem arrives and takes out the beast holding Ron before catching her and kicking the other beast off the ship. He asked Ron if she's alright, but she's more interested in figuring out how Willem just saved her. Willem begins walking away to continue fighting, but he has already sustained severe injuries, so he collapses on the deck after a few steps. Ron takes him to cover for safety, and a few minutes later Willem regains consciousness. But he refuses to let himself rest even for a second. Ron tries to stop him and says he will end up killing himself. He goes back out there, but Willem doesn't listen to her. Fighting is all he is good at, so he's going to fight till the end even if it kills him. But before he goes, he warns Ron not to use her powers too much because all this fighting would push any fairy to the brink of venom overload. For her mindscape, Kathle watches as Willem walks through the ship with a death wish, and she doesn't like it, so she tells Elk that she has a favorite ask. Elk already knows what Chiefly is going to say, so she outright refuses. Kathle tells her she made a promise to Willem that she would always be by his side. Plus, there's something she still needs to tell him. Elk tries to talk Kathle out of it, since if she goes back she will fade away entirely, all her memories, all her feelings. Kathle as a whole cease to exist. Kathle doesn't like the idea of disappearing forever, but she hates the idea of Willem dying alone even more. So regardless of the consequences, she wants to go back to him. Back on the ship, Nephrin is still fighting the beasts, and she's still holding her ground as the venom buildup is starting to cause her mind to disintegrate as well, so she's knocked into a crate. She is starting to lose control of her body, and she knows that there's no way she will survive at this point, so she gives up on trying to keep her venom at a moderate level and goes all out to kill the beast. After that, Nephrin is left convulsion on the ground, and to make matters worse, one of the ship's engines is blown out, so it tips over and Nephrin is about to fall out. The soldiers want to try to save her, but she tells them to stay away since she's already gone past her venom limit, so any moment she might explode. She falls off the ship and accepts her death, but the last second Willem grabs her hand to save her. He refuses to lose anyone else today, so he says he's going to pull Nephrin back up, and she can see how hard he is trying, but she tells him she's not worth it. She might explode soon, and if that happens this entire ship will be destroyed, so as much as she would like to stay with him she has to let go. Willem watches as Nephrin falls to her death, but he refuses to let things end like so. Even if it costs him his life, he's going to make sure he saves her. Meanwhile, Kathle is slowly walking towards a hole in the wall and picks up the wounded Noth's dug weapon. Noth tries to talk Kathle out of what she's about to do, because if she goes down there, she's guaranteed to die. But Kathle is willing to accept that because she's gotten to experience true happiness, so nothing else matters now. She dives off the ship and begins flying towards Willem and Nephrin to save them, and just before they hit the ground she manages to cushion the fall with her wings. Willem and Nephrin are shocked to see Kathle. There's no time to talk since there's still a horde of beasts to deal with. Kathle activates the dug weapon and charges towards the horde for one final battle, and as she fights, she reminisces about all the wonderful memories she has had with Willem. It may not have been a perfect life, but Willem made her special, so she wouldn't change a thing about it. And as the beast pierce through her body, she opens her fairy gate and unleashes a massive venom explosion, killing all the beasts in the area, including herself. Thanks for watching. Want more anime recaps? Subscribe the channels and turn on notification bell.